Hello and welcome to the Heatrick Strength and Conditioning Podcast from the leading Muay Thai performance coaching company for busy Thai boxers and trainers to achieve total physical confidence for the biggest fights. My last podcast discussing the keto diet for fighters proved really popular. Thank you for all the comments, the discussion and the shares. And do go and catch up with that episode if you've missed it. My hope is that this podcast format will allow much more two-way interaction with all of you guys in the Muay Thai community. And so far, so good. Thank you. And I hadn't intended to, but it looks like you all wanted a follow-up. If I recommended carbs are important for a fighter's performance, what type, how much, and when, etc., etc. So in today's podcast, here are my thoughts on carbs for fighters. Before we start, again, I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian. I'm an experienced strength and conditioning coach who specialises in Muay Thai performance, and also an international amateur and pro Thai boxer myself. I'm sharing with you today some of what I've learned training and making weight for fights myself, and what I've generally found has worked best for the fighters I've coached all over the world too. And as always, I'm continually learning, and I'll change my approach as I find a better way. But you've asked, and right now, this is briefly how I handle carbs for fighters. First up, not all carbs are created equal. Some are just better quality than others. And by quality, I mean contain more nutrients and release slower into your system, so your body does a better job of using it effectively for energy rather than storing it as body fat. Generally speaking, simple and refined carbs are poor choices, and complex, unrefined, lower glycemic index carbs are better, such as whole grains, fruits and vegetables. Most of the time, avoid the processed sugary snacks and drinks and go for natural, unprocessed carbs. The mission here is all about managing insulin levels better. Insulin is the hormone your body releases in response to increased blood sugar, usually following a meal. Insulin not only controls blood sugar levels to keep your system operating within safe limits, but also acts as an anabolic or storage hormone. It shuttles glucose, carbs, and amino acids, proteins, and blood fats to cells in your body. So as well as energy, carbs are important for growth and repair. And those interested in making the best use of the protein they're consuming, carbs are important in transporting those amino acids to the muscle tissue. For a fighter, that leads me to talk about nutrient timing, when you consume your meals and snacks. And generally, fighters run best when blood sugar is kept stable and nutrients are readily available. So that means consuming something every 3 to 4 hours. So a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner with a snack in between works well. Just make sure the total calorie intake matches your goal of either fat loss, weight maintenance, or muscle gain. Your body handles any carbs better just after training, even processed higher glycemic index carbs. In fact, it's the time to snack on something a little more naughty if you're going to. Just after training, carbs that rapidly absorb are better for restocking the energy levels, the stored glycogen, in the muscles you've just been using explosively. This is even more critical if you're training again later that same day, like most fighters will. Athletes training for combat sports have a higher demand for carbs than sedentary people. Don't confuse a diet plan for a regular person as being what's needed for a combat athlete who's training regularly. Research consistently shows that people training regularly need to eat enough carbs or their testosterone levels will fall, while cortisol levels, the stress hormone, will rise. And it'll also mess with a woman's delicate hormone levels, and nobody wants that. For both men and women, it's a recipe for losing muscle and gaining fat and negatively affecting athletic performance. Your demand for protein and fat each day is pretty consistent, and I stick to prescribing baseline daily levels for these two macronutrients. However, your daily carb requirement varies depending on how active you are, how much training you're doing. Something else to consider when looking at the amounts of carbs you personally need is your somatotype. You know, whether you're naturally an ectomorph, a mesomorph, or an endomorph. You have a small, medium, or large framed body. Small framed fighters generally need higher carbs and lower fat. Medium framed fighters need balanced levels of protein, fats, and carbs. And large framed fighters typically need a higher level of fats and proteins and lower carbs. Nutritional personalization is now something I handle for fighters on my online program through video coaching calls, because as with everything, one size doesn't fit all. We all handle and demand carbs differently. There are outliers that do well on lower carbs, about 2.5% of the population, but the vast majority of people, about 70%, run better on moderate carbs. And even for the lower carb outliers, as I discussed in the last podcast, high intensity explosive performance will suffer if you're restricting your carb intake. Of course, it's about balance. Pushing extremes in any direction will lead to problems. So that's all we've got time for in this episode. And if you want to download a one-page reference sheet to go with this podcast, there's a link in the text. And if you've got any questions or want to check out our library of free articles and videos, head over to heatrick.com. That's Heatrick, where I'd love to help you reach your Muay Thai goals. And don't forget to subscribe to our Heatrick Muay Thai Strength and Conditioning podcast on iTunes, Stitcher and Anchor. And you can audio message me on Anchor too, so that you can actually feature in future episodes. I'll catch you next time.